I was feeding the horses when I noticed the trench. A long, ugly scar cutting across the north side of my ranch, like someone had dragged a knife through my land without asking. I followed it, boots crunching over broken brush, until I found the pipe shiny, new, and definitely not mine. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at it like it might apologize. It didn't. That's when I saw her SUV bouncing down the dirt road, kicking up a storm of dust. A white Lexus, of course. I knew who it was before she even parked. Eliza Langford, head of the Silver Pines HOA and self-declared queen of the subdivision bordering my south fence line. She stepped out wearing wedge sandals, a sun hat, and enough perfume to kill a fly at 10 paces. "Eliza," I said flatly. "Harlan," she replied, with that fake smile she always wore when she was about to say something infuriating. "I see you found the new irrigation line. You mean the illegal pipe you ran through my ranch," I said, pointing at it. She laughed, like I'd just told her a cute joke. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a small section. We needed a better water supply for the community garden and the fountains at the entrance sign. The HOA approved it." "I didn't," I said. "Well, technically, you're not in the HOA," she said, waving her hand like my 500 acres were just a nuisance. "But we had an engineering firm say it was the most efficient path. It's barely impacting your land." "You didn't even ask," I said, stepping closer. "This is trespassing, Eliza. You crossed my property line and laid a pipe without my permission." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It's not like you're using that land for anything important, and besides, it's for the community." "You wouldn't want to be the reason our summer flower beds die, would you?" I stared at her, stunned at how casually she admitted to it. "You do realize I could sue the HOA for this." "You could try," she said, flipping her sunglasses down over her eyes, "but we have some very good lawyers. And honestly, Harlan, it's just water." That's when the idea hit me. Just water. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked back to the house, heart pounding, not from anger though there was plenty of that, but from the plan already forming in my head. See, what Eliza didn't know, what no one at the Silver Pines HOA seemed to know, was that the creek they'd tapped into for their precious pipeline wasn't just any water source. It came from a spring. And that spring, it wasn't on their land. It was upstream, on a parcel about 9 miles north. And it was for sale. I'd seen the listing just 2 weeks ago at the feed store bulletin board. By the time the sun set, I was on the phone with the county clerk's office, checking the sale status. By the end of the week, I owned the source. Eliza wanted to play dirty fine. She was about to find out what dry fountains and dead flower beds looked like. I signed the purchase agreement for the spring 2 days later, in a nondescript county office that still smelled like old paper and floor wax. The clerk, a soft-spoken lady with reading glasses chained around her neck, stamped it with a heavy hand. I walked out with a manila folder under my arm and full legal control over the water Silver Pines had tapped into. They wanted to play king of the hill. Fine, but I own the hill now. I didn't shut the water off immediately. Instead, I paid a visit to a friend of mine, Nate Griggs, who ran a small surveying and drone mapping business out of a converted barn on the east side of town. Nate owed me a favor back in the day. I helped him track down a cattle thief who'd been rustling from his dad's pasture. I didn't bring it up. I just handed him coordinates and asked him to fly his drone over the trench on my land and follow it south until it ended. He nodded, pulled out his gear, and got to work. Later that evening, I got a digital file emailed to me. It was better than I expected: clean aerial shots, GPS overlays, timestamps. The water pipe didn't just cross my land, it ran through another private property before hitting HOA territory. 2 trespasses, 2 violations. I printed everything, put it in a binder, and labeled it evidence theft of water. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Linwood met me at the ranch around 10. Mid-30s, honest eyes, and a reputation for being one of the few lawmen in the county who didn't play favorites. I handed him the binder. He flipped through it slowly, nodding as he scanned the aerial photos and property line overlays. You sure this is the same pipe? Follow the timestamps, I said. It's one continuous line, they didn't even try to disguise it. He closed the binder and looked over at the trench. They tap into this without so much as a permit. No permit, no easement, no contact, I said. Just showed up and laid it down. Now they're funneling water across 2 pieces of private land into their ornamental fountains. Linwood scratched his head. That's a serious offense. Water rights in this county aren't loose. You planning on filing charges? Already did, I said. Filed a report with the County Water Board yesterday. They're starting an investigation, he nodded. Good. Mind if I take this copy? Made it for you. He walked back to his cruiser with the binder, and I watched him drive off toward the HOA subdivision. It wasn't long before the first sign of panic reached me. Around noon, I got a call from my neighbor, Cal Turner. He owned the pasture just south of my fence, the other property the pipeline cut through. Cal's a retired Coast Guard guy, keeps to himself mostly, but he doesn't appreciate being walked on. Just got a visit from a deputy, he said. Told me some HOA ran a pipe through my field. That true? Drone footage shows it, clear as daylight. You want me to sign a statement? I already wrote one up for you. Just needs your name and date. You think they'll try to bury this? They'll try. Then let's make it public. By mid-afternoon, I'd sent copies of the footage and the property maps to the County Water Board, the sheriff's office, and the local news station. I didn't trust the HOA to play fair, and I wasn't about to let this stay quiet. The news crew arrived the next morning with a van and a camera operator. I walked them down the trench, pointed to the pipe, and handed them a copy of the drone footage. The reporter, a young guy named Mason, asked if I had anything I wanted to say on record. Yeah, I said, looking straight into the lens. If the HOA wants water, they can pay for it like the rest of us, but stealing it, that ends now. The segment ran that evening right after the weather report. Within an hour, my phone started blowing up. Not long after, Eliza showed up again. This time, she didn't bring perfume or wedge sandals. She wore a navy pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase. She knocked on my door like she expected me to be impressed. I opened it and leaned against the frame, arms crossed. May I come in? She asked, voice clipped. No, she glanced at the camera mounted above my porch. You're making this unnecessarily hostile. No, I said. That would be laying pipe through someone else's land without permission. That's hostile, she inhaled sharply. We're prepared to offer compensation for access rights, no interest. You'd rather escalate this into a legal battle? I already have. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. This is a retroactive easement agreement. It includes a generous payment structure and maintenance responsibilities. You don't have the authority to grant yourselves a retroactive right to trespass. She paused, eyes flickering. You'll want to look it over. I didn't take the papers. Let me explain something to you, I said. You built an illegal structure across private land, tapped into a water source you had no rights to, and then tried to keep it quiet. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. She closed the briefcase slowly. We were trying to improve the community. Then maybe the community should know what their dues are really paying for. She stepped off the porch, lips pressed tight. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. I just watched her walk back to the Lexus and peel out of my driveway. That night I shut off the valve, dry, clean cut. No pressure. No trickle. By morning, the fountains in Silver Pines were bone dry, the community garden had no irrigation, and the subdivision's landscaping crew was seen dragging hoses across driveways, trying to reach anything with a spigot. Around noon, I got a call from Nate. You're going to want to check the HOA website, he said. I pulled it up. Sure enough, there it was. A post titled Temporary Water Disruption Community Alert. It blamed unexpected supply issues and infrastructure challenges. No mention of the trespass. No mention of the lawsuit, but the cracks were showing. 2 days later, I got a call from a lawyer. Not one of theirs, this one represented a group of Silver Pines residents fed up with the HOA's secrecy. Apparently, someone had leaked the aerial footage and property maps online. The residents were furious. They'd been told the HOA had negotiated everything legally. Now they were finding out their dues were being used to fund criminal activity. The lawyer asked if I'd be willing to provide a statement. Already written, I said. By the end of the week, a petition had started circulating within Silver Pines demanding Eliza's resignation and a full audit of the HOA's finances. A few residents even drove up to my ranch to apologize in person and offer support. I told them I didn't blame them. I blamed the people who thought they were above the law. Eliza didn't show her face again for a while, but the county water board did. They sent a formal notice to the HOA citing multiple violations of water law, trespassing, and unauthorized construction. Fines were pending. Criminal charges were under review and the sheriff's office. They opened an investigation, citing probable cause for deliberate theft of resources. The pipe, still dry and it was going to stay that way, a week passed and the silence from Silver Pines grew loud. I noticed fewer landscaping trucks passing my gate. The fountains stayed dry. The grass at their entrance sign turned the color of old hay. Still, I hadn't heard a word from Eliza or anyone on the HOA board since the lawyer call. That was fine by me. I figured they were licking their wounds, maybe trying to come up with a way to spin this mess into a misunderstanding. Then came the knock, not on my front door but on the barn. That got my attention. I opened it to find a man in a gray suit, tie loose around his neck, clipboard tucked under his arm. Behind him stood another man, stockier, with the kind of build you only get from hauling people out of cars for a living, a state badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Harlan Ridge?" the suit asked. I nodded and stepped aside. "You're not from the HOA?" "No, sir," he said. "I'm Investigator Miles. This is Agent Delaney. We're with the State Department of Natural Resources, Division of Water Rights Enforcement." "Never had the pleasure," I said. "What can I do for you?" "We're conducting a criminal investigation into unauthorized diversion of natural resources and falsification of infrastructure documentation. Your name came up as the primary complainant." "Come on in," I said. "I've got everything you'll want to see." They followed me into the office I kept above the stable. I handed over the binder I'd already expanded with new documentation, copies of purchase records for the spring, the county's preliminary investigation notes, and a new drone scan Nate had done 4 days ago showing the full scope of the trench system. They flipped through it wordlessly. "Has the HOA made any contact with you since the system was exposed?" Delaney asked. "Only once. They offered hush money dressed up as a retroactive easement contract. I declined. They left without incident." Miles leaned forward. "You mentioned something in your original complaint about the HOA tapping the spring directly before the trench was even built." "Correct. They installed a feeder pump at the spring site before the sale finalized. Thought I wouldn't notice, I guess." "Do you still have that pump?" "I disconnected it, but I stored it in the shed." "Figured someone might want to see it." Delaney nodded. "We'll take a look before we leave." Miles closed the binder and rested his hands on it. "You understand the severity of what you're alleging here: illegal construction, water theft, and now, potentially, forgery of public utility documents?" "I understand," I said. "That's why I didn't just shut off the water and move on." They crossed a line. He gave a quiet nod, then glanced at Delaney. "We just came from the county records office. Someone submitted forged utility permits for that trench. Claimed the HOA had a legal easement through your parcel and your neighbors. Both signed with what appears to be your name and Cal Turner's." "They forged our signatures?" I asked. "Sloppily," Delaney replied. "Your name was spelled wrong on one of them. Cal's was signed in block letters." I felt the heat rise in my chest. Miles continued. "We've requested a subpoena for the HOA's internal records. If we find evidence that the board knowingly submitted false documents, this becomes fraud, possibly conspiracy. Can I do anything to help?" "You already have, but we will need official statements from you and Mr. Turner." "And access to the pump and trench. We're coordinating with the sheriff's office and they'll be issuing a warrant to search the HOA's central office. Good, I said, standing. I'll call Cal. He'll be ready. They thanked me, took the binder and the pump, and left just as the sun started dipping behind the ridgeline. I stood there watching their taillights disappear, the first real sense of momentum churning in my gut. The next day, I got a call from Mason, the news reporter. He wanted an update on the investigation. I told him to be patient. Things were moving behind the scenes. That night, Silver Pines held a board meeting. It wasn't supposed to be public, but someone leaked the Zoom link online. Within minutes, over 200 residents had logged in. I wasn't one of them, but I heard enough. Eliza tried to explain that the water disruption was due to environmental causes. Someone else on the board asked if the environmental cause had a name and a deed to the spring. The chat lit up with questions. Someone even posted a link to the county property records showing my ownership. Then a new voice joined the meeting, Deputy Linwood. He didn't say much. Just that an investigation was active and the HOA was instructed not to delete or alter any records. The meeting ended early. 2 days later, I got a call from Cal. They arrested her. When, just now, sheriff's truck came rolling through like thunder, took Eliza and that weasel of a treasurer, Brad something, cuffed them both. Whole neighborhood watched. I walked to the edge of my property where the trench began, looked down at the dry pipe, and finally let myself smile. Later that afternoon, Agent Delaney called to confirm. They'd found the forged permits, along with internal emails from Eliza and Brad discussing how to fast-track the line by using template signatures for the easement access. Turns out they'd even billed homeowners extra under a fake land acquisition fee to fund the trench work. Fraud, forgery, misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized land use. The charges stacked up like cinder blocks. The rest of the HOA board scattered like leaves in a windstorm. 3 members resigned. The president pro tem tried to claim ignorance but was forced to release all financial records under court order. Meanwhile, the residents of Silver Pines started organizing, not just to replace the board, but to dissolve the HOA entirely. I got a letter in my mailbox a few days later. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. You broke their grip. Thank you. There was a gift card to the local hardware store tucked in the envelope. I didn't need a reward, but I appreciated the gesture. A week later, I received a formal apology letter from the interim HOA leadership. They acknowledged the violations, renounced their claim to any easement, and offered full reimbursement for damages. I sent it straight to my attorney. We were already preparing a civil suit. Cal and I met with the residents leading the petition to dismantle the HOA. They asked about water rights and how to set up a cooperative well system, something legal, transparent, and fair. I gave them some names and pointed them in the right direction. The last piece of pipe was dug out that weekend. They hired a crew to remove it all, every inch that cut across our land. Nate flew one more drone pass for me just to make sure. Clean, the trench was filled, the grass slowly growing back. Silver Pines still didn't have fountains. Their flower beds had withered in the heat, but the tone had shifted. People were talking to each other for the first time. Neighbors helping neighbors fix irrigation lines, plant drought-resistant shrubs, and paint over the faded HOA signs. I walked into the feed store a few days later and found a new flyer on the bulletin board. Community meeting, reforming Silver Pines from the ground up. Below it was a note in red marker, no HOA, just neighbors. I pinned my own note beside it. Water's a gift. So is freedom. I stepped back, took one last look at the board and headed out into the sun, the dust warm under my boots. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not temperature-wise, it was the kind of place that had baked under the same sun-stained windows for 30 years, but cold in the way people get when they're trying real hard not to admit they've been caught. The judge, a wiry man with a silver goatee and the kind of stare that could freeze boiling water, flipped through the stack of documents in front of him. Every so often, he paused, adjusted his glasses, and muttered something under his breath that sounded vaguely like disbelief. Across from me sat 3 members of the former HOA board, Eliza, Brad, and a third man I hadn't seen before. His name was Colin Reese, and the prosecutor had introduced him earlier as the consultant. According to the investigation, he was the one who drafted the forged permits and coached the board on how to bypass the county's water management system by filing through a defunct contractor's license. The district attorney, a woman named Marlowe, stood and addressed the room. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just a case of unauthorized land use. It is a deliberate, organized effort to misappropriate a natural resource, falsify public records, and defraud a community. The defendants did not merely overstep, they orchestrated a scheme, used HOA funds to bankroll it, and retaliated against the one person who caught them." She gestured toward me without looking in my direction. I didn't move. Eliza sat with her arms folded, chin lifted like she still expected someone to come rescue her. Brad stared at the floor, and Colin Reese looked like he was calculating whether he could walk out of this with a suspended sentence if he threw the others under the bus. The judge tapped his pen once against the desk. "Mr. Ridge," he said, eyes finally landing on me, "you've submitted a civil claim for damages. Is that still the case?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said evenly. "I'm seeking restitution for land remediation, legal expenses, and loss of agricultural productivity during the construction period." "Understood." He turned to the defendants. "Given the evidence submitted by the Department of Natural Resources, the County Engineering Office, and the prosecuting attorney, I will be issuing a ruling on both the civil and criminal charges today." Eliza's lawyer, a stiff man with a clipboard the size of a dictionary, stood suddenly. "Your Honor, we request leniency based on community service and the defendant's prior good standing." The judge raised a hand. "Save it," he turned to Marlowe. "Is there any further evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." She walked to the table and picked up a folder, unfolding it carefully. "We have a sworn affidavit from the HOA's former secretary, indicating that the board voted in a closed session to proceed with the trench, despite knowing it crossed private land. Furthermore, we have a digital record of financial transactions showing the HOA paid Mr. Reese through a personal account disguised as a landscaping consultant fee." The judge leaned back slowly. "That's enough." He laced his fingers together and looked at Eliza. "You abused your authority, endangered your neighbor's property, and violated state law. You didn't make a mistake, you made a plan." He turned to Reese, "And you enabled it. Then to Brad, and you signed off on it." The room fell into a silence thick enough to chew. "I am sentencing all 3 of you to probation with community restrictions, financial restitution to the plaintiff, and a permanent bar from serving on any residential board or committee within the state. Mr. Reese, you will serve 12 months in county detention. Miss Langford and Mr. Halpern, you will each serve 6 months of monitored community service with mandatory legal ethics education. Your civil penalties will be determined in the damages hearing next week." He banged the gavel once. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the air felt clearer. I walked down the steps and found Cal leaning against his truck, arms crossed, one foot braced on the bumper. He handed me a paper cup of coffee without a word. "Well," he said finally, "that's one hell of a way to fertilize your pasture." I took a sip. "A little costly, but it'll grow back." He nodded toward the courthouse doors. "Think they'll actually pay?" "They'll pay," I said. "If they don't, the state will seize their assets." "That HOA still breathing?" "Barely. The residents voted to dissolve it last week." "Got the required signatures, filed the paperwork. They're setting up a neighborhood association now, voluntary, transparent, no dues without consent." Cal gave a low whistle. "That's a first. Had to happen somewhere." He looked out across the courthouse parking lot. "You going to keep the spring?" "For now." "Smart. You're not just holding water, you're holding leverage." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Back at the ranch, the trench had been filled in, leveled, and seeded. Wild grass had already begun to sprout along the scar that once divided the land. Nate had flown one final drone pass and the prints were framed in my office, before and after. A reminder, the damaged section of my property was slowly recovering. I'd hired a soil analyst to assess the compaction and erosion from the trench work, and he'd given me a report showing minimal long-term impact. Still, I plan to leave that patch fallow next season. Let nature do its quiet work, Marlo called a few days later. They've started paying, she said. The restitution fund's being set up. You'll receive the first installment by the end of the month. Appreciate it. By the way, she added, the HOA's former treasurer is cooperating. He's named another board in a nearby subdivision that's been doing something similar with electrical lines. We're opening an investigation. Let me guess, Westview Hollow, bingo. Good luck. That one's like a termite mound, quiet on the outside, rotten all the way through. We'll see what shakes loose. I hung up and made a note to keep an eye on that development. If Westview had learned anything from Silver Pines, they'd be shredding documents already. A few evenings later, I got a knock on the door just after sundown. I opened it to find a young woman holding a clipboard and a stack of flyers. She introduced herself as one of the new committee members from what used to be Silver Pines. We're doing a community cleanup, she said. Replacing signage, clearing out the old HOA office, painting the sheds. Would you be willing to let us park a few trucks near your south fence line for the weekend? We'd keep it clear of the pasture. I studied her face. No arrogance, no assumptions. Just someone trying to fix what others had broken. Fine by me, I said. Just lock the gate when you're done, she smiled. Thank you, I know we haven't exactly been the best neighbors. You weren't the problem, I said. But if you're trying to be better, that counts. She handed me a flyer. It listed a list of volunteer days, a donation drive for the community garden, and a meeting to draft a new charter that emphasized voluntary participation and transparency. At the bottom were signatures, not official ones, just people's names scribbled in ink. Residents. Neighbors. I pinned it to the inside of the barn door. Later that week, I walked the length of the old trench one last time. Birds had returned to the brush, and a few butterflies flitted over the new seedlings. I stopped at the old valve box, now rusted shut, and kicked a little dirt over it. Then I turned and walked back toward the house. Behind me, the land was quiet again, just the way it was supposed to be.